Welcome everyone, Crazy here, and today I'm going to be theorizing what the next chapter for Dead by Daylight could be. So there's a lot of criteria that I'm basing this list off of, but one of the main things that I'm going to be basing it on is the fact that during the last anniversary stream for Dead by Daylight, one of the developers said after the Nicolas Cage release, there was going to be 2 iconic licenses that were going to be licensed with a big capital L, they called it.
The next 2 killers that will follow after that are going to be licensed, and I would say licensed with a big L if I can. Really iconic additions to the game.
And we are back. So yeah, as you know, the chapter that released in August ended up being the Alien chapter, which I definitely would say is a license with a big capital L because it is kind of a household name. I feel like you can ask literally anybody what Xenomorphs or Alien is, and many people would understand what you're talking about and be able to answer that question. This means that the next chapter we're getting in November is most likely going to also be an iconic license that anybody could name. Because of this, I feel like this writes off a lot of different chapters, and also the November chapter is going to be a single killer chapter, meaning no survivor for them. This means that you can write off a lot of potential licenses that have iconic survivors that would work for that chapter. And with that being said, we can move on to my list. So for the ones that I think are not possible or aren't going to happen for this next chapter, of course they can still happen later by the way, but just for this single killer chapter in November, I do not believe The Shining is possible because while it is a iconic license, I feel like you cannot do a Shining chapter without Wendy Torrance. And for the Terminator, sure they have collaborated with Terminator previously in their game Death Garden, and it also is an iconic license. I feel like they wouldn't do a chapter without Sarah Connor. Of course they could if they wanted to, but I feel like that would be a big missed opportunity. Of course there's many others that also would not be very likely, because they have iconic survivors that they most likely would save for full chapters as well, but these are just the main ones that I could think of off the top of my head. Next up, for the chapters that I think are unlikely, but still potentially possible, we have Chucky. Obviously, Chucky is certainly a very iconic license, and they also have been recently working on a pinball video game, which Dead by Daylight is also collaborating with. So it shows they are open to using their license in games. However, Matthew Cote has gone on record multiple times to say he's not quite sure if it would fit in the game very well to have someone playing as Victor the whole time, and he feels it might be a little goofy. Of course, we have seen more recently, Dead by Daylight is adding in more goofy things such as Nicolas Cage and the upcoming Naughty Bear skin for the Trapper. So maybe they have changed their mind, and that's why I did put it in unlikely, but still possible, because maybe they have changed their mind about that. Moving on, we have Vecna from Stranger Things. I'm sure many of you know the reason why this might not be possible is because they did lose the license, and even more recently, Matthew Cote said on the Slasher Radio podcast that they have not had recent contact with them. Of course, he could just be saying that so that people can't start theorizing that they're going to be added, but I do think that Matthew Cote wouldn't straight up lie like that. Next up we have Art the Clown. So, as you may know, Steve Barton, one of the producers for Terrifier, has been very public about wanting Art the Clown in Dead by Daylight, so because of that campaign, it could be likely that they would want to reach out. However, this was very recently that this happened, and typically chapters are made about a year in advance. Meaning if they were to get in contact with them, this would be a chapter that would be coming out next year most likely. So I don't think this is very likely because he wouldn't be public about saying they haven't contacted him yet if they were already in development of the DLC, which they would have to be. Also, while I am a very big fan of Terrifier, I don't think we're quite at the point where we can consider him an iconic slasher killer that is a household name. I do think he will one day get to that point, but I think we need a couple more movies for him to really be a household name. And next up, for chapters that I think definitely could be possible but don't have enough evidence to them, is Candyman. We do know that Tony Todd was recently at a convention in which he said that he's working on another game. The game that he's working on currently is Spider-Man 2, he's playing Venom. But yeah, he did say he is working on yet another game. This could possibly be Dead by Daylight, but it could also be any number of things. The reason why I put this in just maybe and not likely is because there isn't a lot of evidence besides that. Also, he's not exactly a super iconic killer. I am a very big fan of Candyman, but I think a lot of people are not familiar with the franchise. And next up we have Pennywise. So Pennywise is obviously very iconic. I think they're definitely at that household name status, and I would love to have them in the game. However, we do know that Behavior already reached out to the rights holders and tried to get the Pennywise license, but they turned them down. One could theorize that maybe they have changed their mind because of the recent success of Dead by Daylight, with them getting their own movie and having very big chapters in the game. So it totally is possible, but because we don't have any update on that, and the last news we heard is not good news, that's why I just put them in the maybe section. Now we're getting into the territory where I think these next 4 characters are very likely to be this next chapter. So we have Springtrap. The reasoning for Springtrap is many people are asking for them, and Five Nights at Freddy's is a very iconic license. And also the upcoming movie is being made by Blumhouse, in which Dead by Daylight is also working with on the Dead by Daylight movie. They have a connection there. And also, this Five Nights at Freddy's movie is actually coming out next month, so it would be very good timing for a brand new chapter in Dead by Daylight. The only reason why this is in the likely category and not most likely is because besides all the information I just listed, we don't have any indication that Dead by Daylight necessarily wants Five Nights at Freddy's in the game. For the next possible killer, we have the Nun from The Conjuring. So this is yet another thing that's connected with Blumhouse. And as I just said, Dead by Daylight is working with Blumhouse on the Dead by Daylight movie, so there's already a connection and a way for them to contact the license holders to get the rights to it. Also, the Nun is obviously a very iconic character, being in the Conjuring franchise, arguably one of the biggest modern day horror movie franchises. I do believe the Nun would be very cool in the game and is a very underlooked killer that could be added into the game, but certainly would work perfectly. My only reasoning for putting this in the likely category is because yet again, we don't have any indication Dead by Daylight necessarily wants them in the game, and also, not many people are pushing for the Nun to be added into Dead by Daylight. And next up we have the most likely category, and we have the Predator and Jason Voorhees from Friday the 13th. So for these two, I'm just going to go out and say it, I do believe both of these characters are going to one day be added into Dead by Daylight, and I have many reasonings for these. I'm going to do a full breakdown for both of them. So while these may not necessarily be the next chapter being added to Dead by Daylight, I do think sometime in the future they certainly will be. So I'm going to get started on the reasonings for Jason Voorhees being added one day into the game. So as many of you may point out, there was a very big lawsuit for Friday the 13th between Sean Cunningham and Victor Miller. This was a very big lawsuit and caused a lot of things to stop production, such as the Friday the 13th video game. They were forced to shut down because of this, and it was a very big reason why we have never had Jason Voorhees in Dead by Daylight. But as some people still do not know, this has actually since been settled, and now parts of the rights are basically fractured off between the first movie and the sequels that featured the hockey masked Jason. I will be sure to do a full breakdown of all the licenses for Friday the 13th and what Dead by Daylight needs to do to get this to happen in the game. But first, I do want to give some examples of recent developments in the Friday the 13th franchise, because many people still do not know that this has been basically resolved. So first of all, the most recent example is G Fuel Energy. They have done a collaboration with Friday the 13th and even have Jason Voorhees' hockey mask featured on the drink. And this just happened very recently on the 8th of this month. And while this may not seem like a huge deal because it is just a energy drink, this is actually a very big deal because I believe this is the first official product we're getting from Friday the 13th since the rights battle. So this 100% confirms that products can be released for this license. We already did know that there was a video game in development. This was revealed by Harry Manfredini, the composer, and also a Peacock prequel series, but those have not quite yet released, so we weren't 100% sure if there would be potential rights issues. But with this energy drink releasing, we know it 100% can happen and everything is cleared up. So you may be wondering how these products are being released then. And we actually get an interview regarding the Peacock series for Friday the 13th, and they do reveal that they're working with the CEO of Horror Inc. and also Victor Miller. They are both executive producers of the show. And what this allows them is to be able to do anything with the franchise, because Victor Miller owns the original script, so anything relating to Voorhees, Pamela Voorhees, Crystal Lake, and also the CEO of Horror Inc. has all the rights to the masked Jason Voorhees that we know in the sequels. In theory, I believe Behavior could potentially just reach out to Horror Inc. and just get Jason and not call him Jason Voorhees. However, I do believe they would do a Crystal Lake map, and to do that, they would have to contact both the CEO of Horror Inc. and Victor Miller. Some might think it might be overly complicated for them to get 2 licenses, but we have seen games like Call of Duty add Ghostface in the game, and not only get the Fun World license, but also the Scream license. And also, this is Jason Voorhees after all. I feel like many people would buy the game just for this chapter, so they would more than make their money back. Alright, so we have the whole licensing situation figured out, and it's very clear that now they could finally do products for Friday the 13th. Now the question is, do they want them in the game? And if you don't know, Matthew Cote has actually gone on record to say Jason has a standing invitation into the game, and in other interviews has even said they have a rough outline of how he would be added into the game. So this is by far the biggest standing invitation any character has ever had for Dead by Daylight. So with the rights now figured out and products now able to be released for the Friday the 13th franchise, and also Behavior themselves openly wanting them in the game, there's certainly no reason why we won't eventually have Jason Voorhees in the game. Now, would this be for this specific single killer chapter? I'm not too sure, because I do believe Tommy Jarvis would be a great fit for a survivor in the game. They could probably get away without adding Tommy Jarvis as a survivor, but I think it would be a huge missed opportunity. Because of this reason, I think it's more likely Jason will be added later down the road, and this next chapter will instead be the Predator. So, as many of you know, there has recently been an Alien chapter in Dead by Daylight, and Predator and Alien have both crossed over many times because they are in fact the same license. They're both owned by 20th Century Studios, now owned by Disney, so they already have a connection to the license holders, and we actually have even further evidence of that with the Grid skin being in the game. Grid is actually from the Alien vs Predators movie, meaning they technically already have the license to Predator. We know that whenever Dead by Daylight reaches out to license holders, they have pre-planned ideas and concepts for what are going to be added into the game. I would assume if they were to contact Disney and give them a rough outline of everything they want in the game, they would have the full Alien chapter as a concept, and also pitch in the idea of the Predator chapter as well in one full package. This makes it so they don't have to contact them multiple times and renegotiate, just have it as one big negotiation. This makes the process way less complicated, and I'm fairly certain this is what they would have done. So because of this reason, I do believe it's very, very likely the next chapter is going to be Predator, and sometime down the line we probably will also get Jason in the game. There is one small problem. We would not have Dutch as a survivor because this is a single killer chapter. But honestly, with Dutch only being in the first movie and some of the comics, I think they could possibly get away with just not adding Dutch as a new survivor. And this would actually make even more sense if down the road they did do a Terminator chapter and added Arnold into the game as the Terminator. This makes sense because they wouldn't want two Arnolds running around. It would be very complicated, especially with one being a killer and a survivor. And yes, before you say it, I do understand that Terminator wouldn't fit too well as a killer, but the entity is known to change people, and also, the Terminator in the first movie isn't the best person either. This could totally be possible because we know Behavior is already in contact with the Terminator license holders because they did do a crossover for their game Death Garden, so it could be possible that they're keeping this in mind and leaving that door open for the Terminator chapter. I personally would prefer a T-800, but honestly it would be cool to have Arnold as a Terminator in the game as well. Anyways, that's my personal speculation for what I think could be happening with the next chapter in Dead by Daylight. I would like to hear everyone else's opinions on this, and as always, have a wonderful day everybody, and stay safe in the fog.